7 years is a long time to forget someone. Or at least that's what I told myself as I watched him walk into the glass lobby a beat late, hair grayer than I remembered and eyes scanning the nameplates with the kind of hesitation only the truly lost have. He didn't recognize me. Not at first. Maybe not even now. But I knew him the second he hesitated at the front desk, the same way he used to pause at our kitchen counter when caught in a lie, unsure whether to explain or retreat. I hadn't said his name aloud in years, but it sat in my throat like it had never left. He had been my husband. My partner. And then suddenly my greatest undoing. He was applying for a role on the executive strategy team. Ironic, given the last time I saw him, he was walking out of our shared apartment with a duffel bag and a line about how maybe we're better apart. That was 2 weeks after I caught the message. One message. From her. His colleague. A woman I had cooked with, laughed with, shared Uber rides with after late client events. She sent him a note on his birthday and called him love. I saw it. I saw everything. And I still remember the taste of that moment like burnt toast and metal. He never confessed. Just packed, mumbled, and left. And now, 7 years later, he was in my building, holding a resume, adjusting his tie, completely unaware that the CEO who'd be in the final round of interviews was me. I didn't put myself on the schedule. Not yet. I let the junior team leads handle the first 2 rounds, watched from the security feed, my office perched high enough to see everything without being seen. I told myself I was curious. Just curious. But I knew better. I wasn't over it, not really. Not when I still had his last email archived under a folder I labeled closure I never got. Not when I still flinched at birthdays. He made it past the first round. Of course he did. He'd always been charming when he needed to be. He knew how to shape himself into whatever the room wanted. The hiring lead mentioned he was articulate, measured, emotionally intelligent. I nearly laughed. I remembered a very different version. One who locked himself in silence for days after a disagreement. One who never noticed how quiet I had become in the months before I found the message. I added myself to his final interview. Quietly. No one questioned it. When you're the CEO, no one ever does. I arrived early that morning. Sat in my office longer than I should have, just staring at his file. His handwriting was still neat. The kind that looked practiced. Pages of experience, strategic initiatives, awards. All impressive. All clean. Like none of it ever happened. Like the man who once said I was his anchor didn't walk away from the storm he caused. When he entered the boardroom, he looked relaxed, confident. He greeted the team warmly, shook hands with the energy of someone who believed he belonged. I waited until the last minute, then opened the door and stepped in. His eyes landed on me. Paused. And for a flicker of a second, I saw it, the recognition. But he didn't say my name. He didn't move. He didn't even blink long enough to give anything away. Apologies, I said smoothly, sliding into the empty seat across from him. I wanted to sit in on this one personally. We're rethinking our vision this quarter. He nodded. Said something polite. Of course. Thank you for the opportunity. His voice. It hadn't changed. Maybe a little lower, but still deliberate, warm at the edges. He always sounded like someone narrating a documentary. I remember once, in the middle of a fight, he told me I was exhausting. Then followed it up with a paragraph about how emotional labor was a misused term. That was his style. Quiet condescension wrapped in intellect. The questions began. The panel asked about team alignment, crisis planning, digital expansion. He answered smoothly, occasionally gesturing with his hands like he used to do when pitching campaign strategies in our kitchen after dinner. I didn't speak for the first 20 minutes. Just watched. Studied him like a relic. Then the room fell to me. It was my turn. I have a question, I said, folding my hands on the table. Tell me about a time you failed someone you cared about and what you learned from it. He stiffened. Just slightly. But I saw it. Personal or professional? He asked. Whichever left the deeper mark. He hesitated. That wasn't the kind of question you could answer with jargon. He glanced toward the window, then back at me. Still nothing. No flicker. No acknowledgement. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe he didn't remember me. Or worse, maybe he did and was choosing not to say anything. He finally answered. Something generic. A missed partnership deal. A moment he misread a client's tone. It was clean, safe, and completely false. The meeting ended. The team thanked him. I walked him to the elevator not because I had to, but because I needed to feel it. The space. The silence. The way he walked beside me without saying my name. Just before he stepped in, he turned to me and said, "It was a pleasure to meet you." I stared at him. Was it? He paused. The doors slid shut before he could reply. I stood there for a long time after that, staring at my reflection in the mirrored elevator doors. And I wondered what hurts more, being forgotten completely or being remembered and ignored. Monday morning came with the kind of stillness I hadn't felt in years. The city outside my window was in motion, cars weaving through intersections, delivery bikes cutting between lanes, people walking with that robotic morning purpose, but my office felt frozen. I sat at my desk earlier than usual, a half-drunk coffee going cold beside a glowing screen, trying to will myself into focusing on something, anything besides the file I had just reopened. After the interview, I told the team I needed a day to consider. That wasn't unusual. We rarely hired that high up without some time to reflect. But I didn't need reflection. I needed control. I'd built this company from the ground up after my divorce. Every late night, every investor call, every product launch, brick by brick, like therapy I could touch. This place was the proof that I survived him. That I'd grown from the ashes of a marriage that turned to smoke the second I realized he had been someone else the whole time. And now he was back. Not as a ghost, not as a what-if, but as a man trying to step through a door I'd built without him. I stared at the resume again, this time more analytically. The projects were legitimate. His roles were earned. The references checked out. No gaps. No mistakes. Nothing you could flag. Except I knew how good he was at hiding the mess. I lived with it for years. That's the thing about people who lie to themselves for a living, they get better at making it sound like truth. Still, I didn't decline him. I sent a note to HR, move forward with the offer. Let's see what he does with a second chance. But I didn't tell them why. I didn't tell anyone. Some part of me needed to see it play out. A controlled burn, if you will. Like watching an old building collapse from behind glass, safe, distant, calculated. He accepted within the hour. Of course he did. No questions, no negotiation. That was the first sign. He was hungry. Maybe desperate. Maybe trying to outrun something. Or maybe, like me, he just didn't know what to do with unfinished business. I tracked his onboarding schedule the same way I tracked quarterly KPIs, obsessively. Watched his calendar fill up with team syncs, department intros, product briefings. It was surreal, really. Seeing his name on internal dashboards, watching it float between time slots like he belonged. Like he had always belonged. No one on the team knew our history. They joked about him being chill and experienced. One of the senior analysts even mentioned she liked his voice in meetings. I almost laughed. I used to like his voice too. Until I realized how easily it could be used to manipulate, to pacify, to dodge. On Wednesday, I saw him in the hallway near the copy room. He was talking to Leah from Growth Marketing. I recognized the tone immediately, casual, low, just enough charm to be disarming. I used to hear that tone across restaurant tables when he didn't want me to ask follow-up questions. He still had it. Still had that natural ease. I wondered how many people in the building would end up enchanted before they realized he left messes behind like breadcrumbs. I passed him without stopping. He glanced at me, offered a polite nod, nothing more. It was like we were strangers. Or worse, former classmates pretending we didn't once share a life. I went to the stairwell afterward. Closed the door. Sat on the landing like I used to during the worst nights of our marriage when I needed silence that didn't come with expectations. I let myself breathe. Just for a minute. Because I was starting to feel it again, that quiet unraveling. Not rage. Not grief. But that thin, paper-cut sensation of being unsettled. He hadn't said anything yet. Hadn't tried to corner me to acknowledge it, to ask. But he knew. I felt it in the way he paused when our eyes met. In the way he said thanks again too carefully at the end of a department call. He knew. And he was waiting. Friday came with rain. A thick, stubborn storm that turned the lobby into a parade of umbrellas and wet footprints. He was already in the building when I arrived. I caught a glimpse of him near the third-floor espresso machine, his shirt sleeves rolled, tie loose, like he had been there for hours. He looked tired. Not bad, just lived in. And for a moment I remembered what it felt like to wake up next to that. To sit at the edge of the bed and feel his hand brush my back. To hear the sound of him humming in the shower like the world didn't weigh him down. That version of us had disappeared so quietly it sometimes felt like a dream I had made up. I spent the afternoon reviewing reports I couldn't focus on. My mind kept drifting. Why was he here? Really here? It wasn't a coincidence. I refused to believe that. People don't just stumble into the orbit of their exes 7 years later at executive-level jobs by accident. Not with his ego. Not with his history. He was circling something. And I needed to know what. I stayed late that night. Told the team I had board prep. Another lie. The office emptied out slowly until the only sounds were the elevator bell and the hum of the building's ventilation. At 7:42 p.m. I saw him again. Not through a camera. Not by accident. This time I watched him deliberately. He walked down the east hallway, turned right, and disappeared into a side corridor. One that led to storage. I followed. Quietly. Not to catch him, not yet. Just to confirm the feeling in my gut. The hallway was dim. Most lights on that side of the building went into power-saving mode after 6. I saw the storage room door ajar. Heard the sound of a cabinet drawer sliding. I stopped just short of the entrance. He was in there. Alone. Flipping through a file box labeled Q2 Legacy Contracts. His back was to me. I didn't move. Just stood there, watching. Wondering. What was he looking for? Why? What memory was he chasing? He found something. A folder. Blue. Thin. He stared at it for a long time before slipping it under his arm and walking out. I ducked into the adjacent hallway, heart pounding, unsure what I had just witnessed. Later, after he left for the night, I returned. The box was still there. But one file was missing. The one I had seen. I checked the contents. And at the very bottom, tucked beneath a layer of dusty receipts, was a nameplate. Mine. From before I was CEO. From the year everything collapsed. It must have fallen in during one of the office moves. Or maybe it had been placed there. I picked it up and held it. The cold plastic pressed into my palm like a question. If he had seen this, he knew. He remembered. He always had. The silence wasn't ignorance. It was strategy. And now I had to figure out why. Because something had shifted. This wasn't just a job to him. He was following a thread. And whatever he was pulling at, it led straight back to me. The following Monday arrived with an eerie sense of calm, like the pause before a storm you can feel coming in your chest more than in the air. I woke before my alarm, not because I was excited for the day, but because sleep had become a thin, restless thing too easily broken, too difficult to return to. I stared at the ceiling in the half-light of dawn, wondering how much of what I was doing was about control and how much was just unresolved chaos wearing a different outfit. By the time I reached the office, he was already there. His name glowed on the check-in log, timestamped 7:41 a.m. No one else on his team arrived before 9. That meant he wanted to be alone. Or invisible. Or both. I went to my office, set down my bag, and opened the internal system. Searched his activity. It wasn't standard protocol. CEOs didn't monitor logins. But I had built this place. Every digital brick. I had access to everything. I told myself it was a matter of company security. But it wasn't. Not really. There it was again, access request flagged for a legacy folder. This one was older than the last. It wasn't even from his department. A project from 8 years ago, before I launched this firm, back when I was still clawing my way out of the ruins of my last one. The archive contained files from the consulting group I'd briefly partnered with after the divorce. And tucked in that partnership was a name, Thomas W. Rains. His name. A client advisor listed on a single initiative, the Bridgepoint Recovery Expansion. I remembered the project. Barely. It had died in the planning stage. But what I hadn't remembered was that he was part of it. That meant we had crossed paths, professionally, not long after he left me. And I never knew. Or maybe I had buried it like so many things. But now he was trying to unearth it. I closed the file and stared at the blank spot on the wall across from my desk where a painting used to hang before I redecorated. My hands felt strange. Like they didn't belong to me. Later that day, I passed him in the corridor outside the main lounge. He didn't flinch. Didn't speak. But he turned slightly as we passed, just enough to show me something. A look. Subtle. Like an invitation. Or a dare. I didn't bite. Not yet. That night, I stayed behind again. I told the team I needed uninterrupted space for annual review planning. Another lie. It was getting too easy. I sat in my chair for hours, scrolling through documents I didn't read, letting the silence wrap around me like armor. Then, at 8:12 p.m., I saw him. Through the reflection in the window, I watched as he entered the break room and stood at the far counter, alone. He wasn't eating. Wasn't pouring coffee. He just stood there, staring at the microwave door like it held answers. Then he pulled something from his pocket, a small piece of paper, and slid it into the crack between the vending machine and the wall. A place only someone looking very closely would notice. He left a minute later. I waited 10. Then I went down. My heels echoed on the tile as I approached. I glanced around, confirmed I was alone, and pulled the paper from where he'd wedged it. It was a napkin, folded twice. Written in neat, sharp handwriting, "You kept the firm. I kept the silence. I don't know which of us paid more." No name. No date. Just that. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. Was it a peace offering? A confession? A warning? I returned to my office, the napkin clenched in my hand like a secret note from high school passed during detention. I locked it in my drawer and told myself to let it go. But I didn't. The next morning, I scheduled a walkthrough meeting with the internal audit team. Just an excuse to go down to his floor to be near where he worked. I wanted to see it. Not him, his space. His desk. The orbit he'd carved for himself here. When I passed by, I slowed just enough to glance. His desk was clean. Too clean. No family photos. No notebooks. No clutter. Just a computer, a black pen, and a single framed photo turned face down. That struck me. It wasn't just impersonal, it was intentional. He wasn't trying to be seen. He was trying not to be remembered. But from what? Or whom? I continued with the walkthrough, answered questions about infrastructure updates, made polite suggestions about process optimization, and all the while my mind was tracing connections that didn't yet make sense. By Thursday, the tension had shifted. Something unspoken was coiling between us. Not quite anger. Not regret either. But a pressure. Like both of us were waiting for the other to blink first. At 5:58 p.m., I received an email. No subject. No body. Just an audio attachment. I stared at it for a long time. The sender, anonymous via internal relay. That meant it was sent from inside the company through a privacy-forward submission tool we'd implemented for whistleblowers and sensitive employee feedback. Only a handful of people even knew how to use it. I played the file. It was him. His voice, low and unguarded, speaking slowly as if thinking aloud. I never expected this. I didn't come here to make a scene. Or stir anything up. I just needed to see what had survived. He paused. Then I was wrong to think I'd left it all behind. You were always the one who saw things through. I was always the one who left when it got too heavy. I'm not asking for anything. But I had to say it somewhere even if no one listens. The message ended. Just that. A voice in the dark, sent without a name, floating in the internal system like a whisper that found the wrong door. I played it twice. The second time I closed my eyes. The weight of the silence after it ended was worse than the message itself. The next morning I passed him in the lobby. He didn't stop. Didn't look. But I saw the twitch at the corner of his jaw, the way his hand flexed like he was holding back something. We were reaching a point where the past was no longer a secret. It was a presence. Breathing. Watching. Waiting to be acknowledged. That afternoon I entered the stairwell halfway between the 3rd and 4th floors. I sat. Waited. And at 6:12 p.m. I heard footsteps. Slow. Approaching. He appeared around the corner and froze. I didn't move. You found it, he said. Not a question. I nodded. You sent it. He looked down, then back up. I didn't think you'd listen. Then why send it at all? Because I had to say it somewhere. Even if it wasn't to you. I stared at him, remembering the day he left me without closure, without answers. You knew who I was the moment you saw me, didn't you? He didn't blink. I never forgot you. Then why act like you did? His answer was quiet. Because I didn't want you to be the one with all the power this time. We stood there in the stairwell, two people who had once built a life together, now reduced to this, echoes, shadows, half-spoken truths. And something in me cracked. Not from pain. From clarity. We weren't circling each other anymore. We were standing on the same step, finally looking each other in the eye. Tell me the rest, I said. Tell me what you're really doing here. And for the first time since he returned, he answered without hesitation. I came here to find what I buried. But now I'm starting to think it wasn't lost. Just waiting. The following week unfolded like a slow-burn novel, every page turned not with action but with implication. Something had changed between us after that stairwell conversation. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't forgiveness. It was something more dangerous, acknowledgement. Like we had both stopped pretending. For days, we didn't speak. Not in hallways. Not over email. Not even through sidelong glances. But the tension in the air had a pulse now. I could feel it in meetings when his name came up. I could feel it when our calendar slots came dangerously close to overlapping. I could feel it when I saw his initials in internal feedback reports. He was good at what he did. I couldn't deny it. His department was outperforming projections. His peers respected him. He took the lead on a struggling client initiative and turned it around in 3 days. The team called him sharp, level-headed, a quiet anchor. That last one stung. Because I remembered what it felt like to lean on him and feel the ground shift anyway. I thought I was done analyzing him, but I wasn't. One afternoon, I pulled up his access logs again. Not because I needed to, just because I couldn't help it. And there it was, he had viewed internal media archives. Not documents. Not client files. Media. Photos. Company video reels from our early launch years. Footage we barely showed anymore. I scrolled further. He'd watched an all-hands video from 6 years ago. One where I gave the keynote in a gray suit and trembling voice, my hair pulled back so tightly I looked like I was holding myself together by strands. I remembered that speech. I'd rewritten it 4 times and still hated every word. And now, years later, he'd gone back and watched it. Twice. That same day, I received a package on my desk. No return address. Inside was a slim folder. 3 items. A photo, a page torn from an old notebook, and a flyer from a jazz bar we used to sneak into in our 20s. The photo was of me, taken at some point during the firm's first year. I was sitting on a folding chair outside the building, legs crossed, laptop on my knees, a coffee cup balanced dangerously on the edge of the armrest. It wasn't staged. I didn't even remember it being taken. But it was unmistakably real. I looked tired. Not defeated, just deep in the kind of exhaustion you don't share on social media. The note wasn't signed. It simply said, "You never looked more alive." I stared at that line for too long. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't nostalgic. It was raw. Like someone had held a mirror up to a version of me I didn't know still existed. I kept the folder in my drawer. I didn't speak to anyone about it. But I thought about it every time I walked past his office door. That Friday, something shifted. A team lead requested a skip-level review for an interdepartmental conflict. Nothing major. Just a procedural misunderstanding. The kind of thing I usually passed off to HR. But I said I'd handle it. The meeting was scheduled for 3:15 p.m. Conference Room D. When I arrived, he was already there. Sitting alone, flipping a pen between his fingers, staring out the window. "They rescheduled," I said. "They sent the update 10 minutes ago." He turned. "I know. I saw the email. I figured you might still come." "You were right." A pause. "Then, do you always dig into legacy archives when you start a new job?" He didn't flinch. "Only when the past isn't finished with me." I sat across from him. The light from the window hit his face in a way that reminded me of the mornings we used to eat breakfast in silence after nights filled with words neither of us knew how to say out loud. "Why didn't you tell me you remembered?" I asked. "The first day. The interview. You looked right at me." "Because I wasn't sure you'd want me to," he said. "And if I did? Then I still needed to understand why I came here." "And?" "I thought it was guilt," he said. "Or some broken instinct trying to apologize without asking for anything. But it's not that. Not entirely." I waited. He glanced at his hands. "There's a part of me that never left the city. Or you. Even after everything." I told myself I moved on. But I just moved around. "You were still the center." The words landed like a slow wave. Not heavy. Not crushing. But inescapable. I folded my arms, not in defense but to hold myself still. "You left me when I was at my lowest," I said. "You walked away without explanation. And I rebuilt from nothing. Alone." "I know. Do you?" "I watched you rise," he said. "From a distance. Not in person. But through the world. News articles. Interviews. Awards. You made something powerful. And I wasn't a part of it. But I saw what you became. Then why come back?" He hesitated. "Because I needed to stand in it. Not just read about it. Not just admire it from the sidelines. I needed to know if I had the courage to face the life I abandoned." The room fell silent. Not uncomfortable. Just full. Full of words we hadn't said in years. Full of breaths held back for too long. "There's no redemption arc here," I told him. "I'm not a checkpoint on your healing journey." "I know," he said. "I don't want a second chance. I just wanted to see the woman I left behind. To know she existed. Not as a memory. As something real. Someone I once knew and failed to understand." I looked at him then. Really looked. And for the first time since he reappeared in my life, I saw him not as a symbol, not as a wound, but as a man standing at the edge of his own reckoning. He wasn't here to fix what broke. He was here to finally see what he broke. I stood. Walked to the door. Paused. "You were wrong about one thing," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "You said I looked most alive in that photo." I turned to face him. But I was barely surviving. It just didn't show. He nodded slowly. "Then maybe you've always been stronger than I knew." I said. And I still am. I left the room not because I needed to escape, but because I had said what I came to say. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was running from anything. I felt still. Whole. And ready. The building was quiet again. Fridays always felt different. Half the team worked remotely, the hallways emptied out by 4, and the office took on a tone that reminded me of Sunday evenings in our old apartment when everything was winding down but nothing had really begun. I stayed late, not because of deadlines, not for control. This time I stayed because I needed stillness. I needed to walk the halls not as a CEO, not as the woman he left, but just as myself. I went to the West Wing, the oldest part of the building. It still had the original glass tiles in the stairwell and the narrow conference rooms with squeaky doors. I liked it there. It reminded me of when things were raw, when I wasn't polished or public or powerful, just someone with a pitch deck and a dream. I stood outside conference room C, the same room where we first locked eyes again. I pushed the door open. Empty. I sat down anyway. The lights were dimmed, the air slightly cooler than the rest of the building. I let myself breathe there. For a long time. Until I heard footsteps. Measured. Unhurried. He appeared in the doorway and paused. I saw your calendar, he said. Didn't mean to interrupt. You didn't, I replied. I figured you'd show up eventually. He stepped inside but didn't sit. Just stood there like he was still unsure how far he was allowed to enter. I submitted my resignation, he said finally. Today. End of next week. I nodded slowly. Why now? Because I think I've found what I came for. I waited. He stepped forward, pulled something from his coat pocket, and placed it on the table between us. A small envelope. No name on the outside. Just a folded line where it had been sealed and reopened. I wrote this 7 years ago, he said. The night I left. I never gave it to you. I didn't reach for it. Not yet. Why didn't you? Because I was a coward. And I told myself you'd be better off without my explanation. Without the mess. But I wasn't, I said. I carried the silence like a second skin. I had to make peace with ghosts that never spoke. I know, he said. And I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just need you to see it. All of it. I picked up the envelope and opened it. The letter was handwritten. The ink slightly faded, the folds deep. His handwriting was exactly as I remembered, controlled, leaning slightly forward like it was always trying to get to the next thought too fast. I read it in silence. He didn't try to speak while I did. It was about guilt, about shame. About the fear of being seen for who he really was, weak, grieving, unable to articulate the loss that hit him when I miscarried. Twice. He hadn't told me he knew about the second one. I had kept it from him, buried it beneath long workdays and fake smiles, thinking I was protecting us. But he'd known. And instead of holding me, he'd pulled away. Found validation elsewhere. Easier places. Shallower water. He wrote about watching me sleep and wondering when I had stopped dreaming. About wanting to be the man who could carry both our pain but finding himself crushed beneath even his own. And in the final lines, he said this, I left because I thought I had ruined you. But the truth is, I left because I was terrified you would survive without me. And you did. And I see now that was the only thing I ever truly got right, getting out of your way. I folded the letter. I didn't cry. I had cried enough for a lifetime in the early years. Instead, I looked up at him. You said you found what you came for, I said. What was it? You, he replied. Not the woman I remembered. Not the wife I failed. But the person you became when I stopped standing in your light. And what are you hoping for now? I asked. Closure? Redemption? He shook his head. I'm not hoping for anything. I just didn't want to disappear again without saying goodbye properly. The word goodbye hung in the air like a fragile thread. I stood. Walked to the window. The city lights shimmered like reflections on dark water. You're not the same man you were, I said. And I'm not the woman you left. I know. But that doesn't mean we erase everything. Some things stay with you. Some things matter even if they don't survive. I've learned that, he said quietly. I turned back to face him. There's nothing left to fix here. But there's something to respect. That's more than I ever thought I'd get. We stood there for a while, neither of us speaking. Then, without planning it, we walked out of the building together. The elevator ride down was silent. But it wasn't the silence that hurt. It was the kind that accepts, that settles. Outside, the air was cool. A soft breeze brushed past us as we stood at the curb. He turned to me. I'm sorry it took me this long to understand. I'm sorry you never asked for help when it would have mattered, I replied. He nodded. Not wounded. Just honest. And that was enough. Take care of yourself, I said. And finish what you start next time. He smiled. Not wide. Just enough. I will. Then he stepped into a cab and was gone. Just like that. No dramatic ending. No final twist. Just a man who once broke me now walking away in silence and me still standing. I went back upstairs, sat at my desk, and opened the draft of my next keynote speech. There was a line I had been stuck on for weeks, something about resilience. Now I knew what to write. That resilience isn't about rising above the pain. It's about facing it when it finally looks you in the eye. About staying still long enough to let the echo fade. I finished the line. Then I closed my laptop. I didn't need to carry his letter anymore. I'd read it. I'd heard it. And now I could leave it behind without guilt. I poured myself a coffee and watched the city fall into night. Somewhere in that darkness, I knew he was beginning again. And so was I. If you've ever had to choose between closure and peace, I hope you choose peace. And if the story meant something to you, if it made you feel seen, even for a second, then subscribe, leave a comment, and tell me what part of your story you're finally ready to let go of. Because maybe that's how we all start again. One goodbye at a time.